At the just completed NATO summit, NATO leaders, along with President Trump, met to decide what the future is going to be of the alliance. You may recall that last year, the declaration by NATO was that inevitably Ukraine would join NATO. That was the big headline takeaway then. Of course, then you had President Trump elected, Joe Biden, who led that conference in Washington. That went away, and now no one even talks about that as much. But that has been replaced by almost a more pernicious declaration. If we said back then that having Ukraine was an inevitable, when we knew that that was the most antagonistic thing to the Russians and what by everyone's accounting was one of the primary causes of the current now 3.5-year war, then this time seems to be worse, because instead of now it's just NATO offering membership to Ukraine or potentially doing so, now it's like the NATO is changing the focus from anything about Ukraine or even self-defense to looking eastward and looking for a new adversary and an opponent. And not just looking at Russia. Obviously, they've been doing that since they were founded in 1949. But now almost as though they're saying we are preparing for war, not in the traditional sense that most would think about it was, to have peace, you have to prepare for war, going back to George Washington's day. This almost sounds like, and the way it's being presented is that we are increasing our spending so that we can be ready to have a war with Russia. That's the unspoken underlying theme of this, and it's barely unspoken because in many ways it actually is spoken. What is not spoken, and as you're going to see through the few clips I'm going to show here, nobody is even talking about diplomacy. No one in the Western alliance is even considering how can we improve relations with Russia? How can we get this war solved and off the table so that the entire continent, all of Europe, all of Russia can get to some kind of even theoretical hope to get to a place of normalcy and dialogue so that there's no more war. And instead, Europe and the West writ large is saying, no, we only want to go down the path of military possibilities. We only want to compel submission to our side. We don't want to give any possibility of any thought to the Russian side. We don't want to give them any credit for anything. And actually forget about credit. We just don't want to give them even the mental assent that they can be rational people according to any kind of independent standard. No, we only want to show them as a caricature, this evil empire, come again from Reagan's day, and this pure evil, etc. They can only be characterized as an enemy in all actions and all words, which promote them as such, so that the only thing left is military power. This is one of the most dangerous times in the entire NATO alliance, in my view, and it is self-inflicted, because this need not be the path, this need not be the outcome, but that is what we are sprinting to do. First of all, I want to start off with a clip here by Secretary General Mark Rutte and President Trump talking about where the alliance is going, both with money and with focus.
I've been asking them to go up to 5% for a number of years, and they're going up to 5%, and that's a big, from 2%. And a lot of people didn't even pay the 2%. So I think that's going to be very big news. NATO is going to become very strong with us, and I appreciate doing it. Perhaps you want to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me first, before I go to spending, I just want to recognize your decisive action on Iran.
Thank you.
You are a man of strength, but you're also a man of peace. And the fact that you are now also successful in getting this ceasefire done between Israel and Iran, I really want to commend you for that.
Thank you.
And I think this is important for the whole world. Then on spending, it's absolutely true. I want to state here, without President Trump, this would not have happened in 3 stages. When you became president in 2016, 2017, you forced Europeans and Canadians to pay more. At this moment, the result of that phase is 1 trillion extra aggregate defense spending by the Canadians and the Europeans. Then came phase 2, when you became president in January last year. Phase 2 is that all the countries not yet on 2% have now committed to the 2%. This is the old goal from Wales in 2014. 7 were not on 2%. Some were saying somewhere in the 2030s. Now this year, all of them, including Canada, including Italy, including Belgium, they have all now committed to the 2%. And now comes the big splash. Today, we will decide to go to 5%. We have to keep ourselves safe from our adversaries, but also because it is fair to equalize with the United States.
And he continues to go on from there, and we don't need to listen to any more of that. But the bottom line is what he's talking about there is, we're going to increase not just this 2% that the U.S. had forever, that, everybody needs to be up there for like more than a decade, way over a decade. Numerous administrations all been pushing for this 2%. Now they're saying, no, we want to more than double it to 5%. Now, a couple of things to point out there. First of all, I think Trump is being played here because you see this lavish praise, and you see this from so many in the Western European leaders, just lavishing him with praise about everything he's done, his great leadership, et cetera, because they know that motivates President Trump. They know that gets his concurrence on things that they want. And pay close attention, because they say they're going to 5%. I have grave doubts that any of them, or at least many of them, actually plan to get to 5%. Maybe UK does. They may want to. But I wager that a majority of these NATO countries had no intention at all of going to 5%. And so they set a timeline that extends beyond President Trump's term, so that he won't be in power until then. So if you get President Trump on board, and especially with the things that they want, which is a focus on Russia as the adversary and making sure they're tied with the U.S. on the Article 5, that's what they were really going after. And apparently that's what they have. Because you see Trump at the beginning of that clip there, he's like, yeah, sure, this is what we're going to do. Yeah, we're in it. We're all the way in. Because he mentioned something about Ruta did about Article 5. And he said, yeah, we're right there. Well, everything about the alliance here is talking about Russia as being the enemy. And everything is focused on this. The reason why you're going up this massive amount on paper of having all this additional defense spending is focused entirely on Russia. And now here's President Trump signing on board with that. Well, how do you think that affects his conversations with Vladimir Putin when you're talking about allegedly trying to get an end to the Russia-Ukraine war? All these comments he's been made about all these beautiful people dying and all this death is causing me real problems, and I want to see it ended. And then, as you saw on a video I made, I recorded yesterday, and you call him the peace president, and yet he's taken no action towards peace. Nothing but words. And every time he has an action, an opportunity to put some leverage behind it and some emphasis and some force and some genuine leadership behind bringing that war to an end and making hard calls, instead he keeps just kicking the can down the road and taking no action. But now he's taking a little bit of action in an opposite direction of saying, yeah, I'm agreeing with NATO. And you've seen, I've talked to you before about how Mark Rutte said, even when this war is over, there will be no normalizing relations with Russia. So he is on record as being incredibly antagonistic to Russia. That is stupid, folks. That is counterproductive to all of Western European security. Because if you won't even contemplate going down a path to making something normalcy, then what do you have? When you're jacking up all your defense spending and you're pointing at the other guy as an evil, unremitted enemy that can't be even talked to, much less negotiated with, then all you are setting up the potential for conflict, and there's no off ramp from it. We've shown that as an alliance and as a Western world, we have punted every off ramp that there was. We have crushed it. We have destroyed it. No matter how many people die, no matter how much money has been wasted on this. That is where we continue to go with this. That is bad for our security. It's bad for our financial security. Definitely bad for our national security. Because instead of going down a path that can lower tensions and create a condition where everybody can at least live together in some kind of modicum of normalcy, we keep it to where the only alternative is continuing to ramp up. Because I promise you, and I saw several comments from Russia, both from Sergei Lavrov and from Putin earlier today in one case, all they are very sharply focused on this. Believe me, they were paying attention to everything coming out of the Hague, and they are saying, look, this is not going anywhere good for us. We also have to take care of ourselves. We better increase defense spending. President Putin talked about how, look, the Oreshnik missile that there's no defense for in the West, it's now in serial production. We're continuing on, and I think he addressed 2 days ago a graduation of a military academy. And he says, listen, you guys have to focus on the future. We are, because we have some adversaries out there. So everybody's using the rhetoric, and then they're increasing defense spending, et cetera. on both sides of this line. This is heading in a bad direction. And it is basically a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Well, I mean, we're doing this to ourselves, like shooting our own selves in the foot. And if we don't be careful, we'll shoot ourselves in the knee, which is a lot worse. But let's look, since I'm still in London, by the way, so let's take a look at what the leader of London say, because he's one of the most influential in all of Europe, along with Emmanuel Macron. And he seems to be even more aggressive than Mark Rutte was.
The NATO summit sent a message of intent that will be heard around the world. But, Mr. Speaker, this must be joined by renewed support for Ukraine. Because if we let Putin succeed there, the deterrent effect on NATO's new plans would be fatally compromised. So I told President Zelensky at Downing Street on Monday that we will harden our resolve. We struck an agreement together to share battlefield technology, accelerating our support for Ukraine's defence, while boosting British security and British jobs.
Yeah, that's the British security, no British jobs. Yeah, that's kind of what he's focused on, and where all of his focus is at. And listen, if your focus is on jobs and on increasing defense spending as a means of economic advancement, then you'll get a tiny sliver of a sector of help, but you're going to do it at the cost of your country. That's something they've got to figure out with. But you keep seeing here that Starmer absolutely adamantly is one of the leaders in NATO, is one of the leaders in Europe, is leading exclusively towards confrontation with Russia. Why would anyone want to follow someone whose only focus is on creating conflict and not going down even the path of diplomacy? It's not even a dual track. It's not like, we're talking with them over here, seeing if we can find any common ground. Maybe we can find a way to resolve this, but we have to have national defense. You could at least argue, all right, there's some logic behind that. What you can't argue is that there's any, well, I guess you can't say logic. There is a logic. It's just bad logic to saying, no, we're going to take this track off the table. We're not even going to talk about diplomacy, and we're exclusively going to go down here. And then, in my view, again, one of the most irrational and immoral things that we can do as the West is that we keep pumping up Zelensky with something akin to a heroin addict. And we're going to keep giving you shots, just enough to keep you alive. But there is no amount. I mean, once you get somebody high and hooked on heroin, it's not like you can give them triple the dose. Give them a lot more, then you'll kill the patient. They can't handle it anyway. Similar thing with Zelensky. There's only so much stuff you can give him because he doesn't have the manpower to use it. So even if you emptied all of your inventories and sent all of your armored divisions equipment, all of your airplanes, everything, and just gave it to Zelensky, he can't use it because he doesn't have the manpower. Russia does. So you have the leader, one of the leaders in Europe, so Keir Starmer, just telling Zelensky, we'll keep going with you, even though there's no military path. And I'm not aware of any genuine military person that claims, that believes otherwise. Unfortunately, I saw an American general a couple of days ago in testimony in the Senate that actually said, yeah, I think there's still a path for Ukraine victory. Either he's lying or he is fatally incapable. I don't know which is worse. I just know it's terrible either way, because that's a lie. It is grossly inaccurate. It has been validated and proven beyond any question on the battlefield. So to say otherwise is to say, no, keep giving that heroin addict more crack. He'll get by eventually. He'll get over it. Do a 12-step program later on. That's the equivalent of what we're telling them here. And I know you can see I'm a little bit aggravated about this because it is so clear. And there is so much physical evidence and now 3.5 years of graphic proof. What I'm telling you is accurate. And yet these people keep going down a path that will lead to more death and destruction for Ukraine, and then set the stage potentially for war for us against an adversary that doesn't want to fight us and doesn't need to and has no intent to do if we don't keep pushing the line further up in there. So I want to show you one other thing, because this Zelensky here, because bolstered by all of this talk, if there's ever any theoretical hope that maybe he'll say, all right, I'm just looking at all the carnage here on the ground and the destruction of my people. I'm gonna do the right thing, and I'm actually gonna head out and just end this war. That was completely knocked out when Zelensky just said, yeah, I want to do more. Not only do I want to do, I'm going to set some conditions. And he got NATO to agree with him to set some conditions that virtually guarantee that there won't be any diplomacy between the two sides.
Some people, and understandably so, ask, what can a tribunal really do? Wouldn't it be better to focus entirely on weapons, technologies, and drones? Of course, military support for Ukraine, tough sanctions against Russia, political pressure on the aggressor are all essential. And these are the things that make Russia feel the true cost of this war. And yes, the aggressor must lose. And we are working on that. Ukrainian lives must be protected. And I thank everyone who supports our defense. But justice matters too. And it must work so that war criminals have nowhere to hide. Not in Europe, not anywhere.
So there you have it. So we want to set up a couple of things in a row here. We're going to say there's going to be a war tribunal, Nuremberg style deal after World War II for the loser in World War II, the Nazi Germany. We're trying to set up from a position of gross weakness and incapacity on the Ukraine side that we want the losers to have a tribunal for the victors. That's like Hitler from his bunker saying, "Yeah, I'm going to bring up the American president and the leader of UK. We're going to bring them up on charges afterwards." And Joseph Stalin, yeah, we're going to throw all of them on a tribunal. Obviously, they'd look at each other like, this dude is like lost his mind, and then they'll continue going forward until they destroyed the German armies, because that did happen. And we're on a path for that same thing to happen here. And all you do with this kind of rhetoric, and then add that Russia must lose. That was so disturbing that he's still saying that. If you needed any proof that Zelensky was delusional and detached from reality, that was your money quote right there. Russia must still lose. That's what he's still saying. And the worst part of it, truly, I think the worst part of it, is that after he made those comments, another minute or two after the video, a raucous applause, standing ovation. People were just cheering in all these European countries and all these parliamentarians. So they are just as deluded. Are they that stupid? Are they that blind? Have they been deceived by alleged people like Starmer and some of these others that feed them information, like this American general that claimed, yeah, there's a path to victory here. And so, yay, we appreciate you doing this. All you're doing is signing the death warrants for more of the people you claim to want, and you're putting a target on the back and potential war on your own back. That's the problem here, is that we're moving toward the potential where there could be war for all of us, not just for a destructive continuing war, a finishing war on Ukraine. Because you're already setting a standard here, and let's all be clear on this. I think that there's probably a lot of belief in NATO that they could care less about Zelensky and expect him to fall, and that once he does, then they'll use that as a new alarm. Oh my God, look, they finished off Ukraine. We have to now maybe go to 6%, 7%, whatever, something like that, to defend ourselves even more, because now Russia's coming for us, free from having to fight that war. Now they're going to get ready for us. I can see that coming already. So they will use Zelensky until he is there's nothing left except for an empty husk of clothes, if he survives at all, or if he goes into exile, something, they'll use that. Then they'll use him as a continued martyr. So there's a lot of ways that they can use Zelensky, but be clear on this. He's probably not clear on this because he's delusional. He's being used like a rag doll. And it is for the purpose of, and I don't know who this is. I know a lot of people talk about this cabal of globalists and all this kind of stuff. I just don't have independent knowledge. I read a lot of things. I don't know. What I can tell you with complete confidence, though, is that the actions of the guys who are in charge are leading you down a path that could lead to war, ergo nuclear war with Russia. There will be no winning in this. There will be no security. None of that stuff that you hope would be the case, that you hired these people through the elections to do, that you expect them to keep you safe. They are going in a path that will cost you a lot of money to make you less safe. How's that for leadership? I mean, who wouldn't get behind that? I mean, come on. You have Viktor Orban, who also has made some comments that here he's similar, at least in this regard, with some of the stuff that we're talking about here, because he sees it very clearly. He, along with Robert Fico, were kind of close to this, obviously geographically so. They see it very different than others. Although Poland and Romania, they're also close as well, and they see it more like Keir Starmer. Hard to understand why, because there's nothing for anyone to gain from this. But that is where we are, folks. NATO summit, don't think that this NATO summit is going to keep anybody else safer. It is eschewing diplomacy so that there is almost no path to lowering tensions here short of military confrontation. Instead, they're building up to it, and I promise you the same thing's happening on the Russian side. They're not going to sit passively and watch you over some alleged long time period to get up to 5% GDP across the whole continent and then them not make a concurrent rise. It will happen. I can guarantee you that it will happen. There's no reason for it not to. And if you think that you're going to bankrupt Russia because of this global arms race, I think that there's a greater chance for the fragility of our own economies to crumble before the Russian one does. So we already failed when we tried to use economic warfare on Russia back in 2022. Don't exacerbate that by making a collapse on our own side heading through 2025 and beyond. That's where we are. You need to know the truth, and we are unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you that no matter what anybody wants to hear, that, my friend, is the truth of it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you very shortly. And I'll be finished here in London for another day or two and head back to the to my normal studio in Washington, D.C. area. We'll see you then. But in the meantime, appreciate you guys. If I can hit the button, hit the wrong one.